A florist sold a withered bouquet to her ex's bride and immediately regretted it. Emily Parker watched her life crumble when the bride of the man she once loved rushed into her flower shop, clutching a completely wilted bouquet. The petals of the white roses were yellowed and drooping, the dry leaves making a strange noise with every movement of the young woman dressed in white. The bride was in tears, her veil askew and her face red from crying. Emily felt her heart stop when she recognized that face. It was Jessica, the new wife of Brandon Mitchell, the man who had abandoned her 5 years ago without explanation. "Please, help me," Jessica shouted, thrusting the ruined bouquet forward. "This bouquet is ruined and my wedding is now. 200 guests are waiting for me at St. Mary's Cathedral." Emily stood frozen for a few seconds. Her fingers trembled as she gripped the wooden counter of the flower shop. This couldn't be a coincidence. She had personally prepared Jessica's bouquet the day before, using her finest imported white roses. How could those flowers be in such a state? "Ma'am, did you hear me?" Jessica insisted, her voice choked. "I need another bouquet just like this one, but not dead." I'm Emily, the owner of the flower shop," she managed to reply, still in shock. "Yesterday, I prepared your bouquet myself. How did it end up like this?" At that moment, Melissa, the shop's longest-serving employee, appeared from the back with a pale face and dirt-stained hands. She had worked there for over 15 years and knew all about Emily's history with Brandon. "Mrs. Parker, I need to speak with you," Melissa murmured, avoiding Jessica's gaze. "Not now, Melissa. Can't you see I have an emergency here?" Emily replied, trying to keep her composure. Jessica looked back and forth between them, sensing something strange was happening. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smudging her makeup slightly. "Do you two know each other? Why are you acting so weird?" the bride asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. Emily took a deep breath and decided to focus on the immediate problem. She couldn't let her personal feelings interfere with the business she had worked so hard to build. "Let's solve this first," Emily said, taking the bouquet from Jessica's hands to examine it. "These aren't the flowers I prepared yesterday. The roses I used were fresh, with firm petals and green foliage." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Melissa lowered her head and whispered something inaudible. Emily looked at her more closely and noticed the employee was far too nervous, fidgeting with her dirty apron. "Melissa, what did you do?" Emily asked, a chill running through her stomach. I switched the bouquets," Melissa confessed, avoiding the gaze of both women. "I took the bouquet from the discard fridge and put it in place of the one you had prepared." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stood speechless, while Emily felt a mix of anger and confusion rising in her chest. "What do you mean you switched them?" "Why?" Emily asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Because I couldn't stand seeing you suffer anymore," Melissa replied, finally looking at Emily. "When I found out it was for Brandon's bride, I couldn't let it happen. You cried so much because of him." Jessica took a step back, processing the information. Her eyes widened as she understood the situation. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice shaking. "You're Emily, the ex-girlfriend of Brandon?" Emily felt the world spin. She had changed the name of the flower shop and avoided any contact with Brandon's social circle, but apparently it hadn't been enough to escape the past. "Yes," admitted Emily, lifting her chin with dignity. "But that has nothing to do with your bouquet. I'm a professional." Jessica began to laugh, but it was a bitter laugh, full of irony. She sat in one of the chairs Emily kept for customers, clutching her stomach as if in pain. "I can't believe this is happening," Jessica murmured. "On my wedding day, I end up at my fiancé's ex-girlfriend's flower shop, and your employee sabotaged my bouquet on purpose." Emily felt a wave of guilt and responsibility. Regardless of her feelings for Brandon, that young woman didn't deserve this on the most important day of her life. "Jessica, I'll fix this," Emily said firmly. "I'll make you a new bouquet right now, free of charge. It's the least I can do." "And with what flowers?" Melissa asked, still tense. "We used all the white roses for Mrs. Thompson's order yesterday afternoon, remember?" Emily rushed to the fridge, where she kept fresh flowers. Opening it, she confirmed what Melissa had said. Not a single white rose was left. Her heart sank. "No, no, no," Emily whispered, checking every compartment. "How could I forget?" Jessica stood up with renewed energy, walking to the fridge to see for herself. "So, there's no way to make another bouquet like it?" she asked, her voice rising again. Emily grabbed the phone and dialed her suppliers, but she knew it was pointless. It was Saturday morning, and most were closed. Still, she tried 3 different numbers, only reaching voicemail. "Oh God, what now?" Jessica began crying again. "Brandon will kill me. His whole family is at St. Mary's Cathedral, important people, business owners. How am I supposed to explain this?" The mention of Brandon's name twisted Emily's stomach. She remembered how much he cared about appearances, about what others thought. It had been one of the reasons he'd left her years ago. "Calm down. We'll find a solution," Emily said, thinking fast. "I can make a bouquet with other white flowers. I have lilies, chrysanthemums, tulips—" "No," Jessica cut in. "It has to be white roses. It's tradition in Brandon's family. His mother personally chose the design. If I show up with other flowers, she'll freak out." Emily knew Brandon's mother, Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, all too well, a rigid, controlling woman who had never approved of Emily's relationship with her son. She could perfectly imagine her reaction if Jessica arrived with a different bouquet. Just then, the doorbell chimed, and an elegant woman in her 60s entered the flower shop. Tall, dressed in a navy blue skirt and blazer, her grey hair in a flawless bun, she carried an expensive leather purse. Emily recognized her immediately. It was Mrs. Barbara herself. "Jessica!" Mrs. Barbara exclaimed upon seeing her daughter-in-law. "Why aren't you at the cathedral? Brandon is beside himself. The guests are asking where you are." The older woman stopped abruptly when her eyes met Emily's. Her expression shifted instantly from concern to surprise, then to something close to disdain. "You?" Mrs. Barbara said, pointing at Emily. "What are you doing here? Why is my daughter-in-law in your shop?" Jessica stepped forward before Emily could answer. "Mum, the bouquet arrived wilted, completely ruined. Emily is trying to help me fix it." "Emily?" Mrs. Barbara repeated the name like it was a dirty word. "You hired her to make your bouquet. Did you know who she was?" "Of course not," Jessica replied, exasperated. "I just looked for the best flower shop in the area. How was I supposed to know it was Brandon's ex?" Mrs. Barbara Mitchell walked through the store, observing everything with a critical eye. She picked up some flowers, smelled others, clearly evaluating the quality of Emily's work. "Well, at least you have good taste in flowers," her mother-in-law admitted reluctantly. "You always did, actually." Emily was surprised by the comment. Mrs. Barbara had never acknowledged her skills before. "Thank you," Emily said, unsure whether to feel grateful or offended. "But that doesn't solve the bouquet problem," Mrs. Barbara continued, turning her attention back to Jessica. "Dear, you need to go back to St. Mary's Cathedral now. The guests are getting impatient." "I can't go back without a bouquet," Jessica protested. "And there are no white roses left anywhere." Mrs. Barbara glanced around the shop again, then fixed her gaze on Emily. There was something strange in her expression, a mix of nostalgia and regret Emily had never seen before. "Emily," her mother-in-law said softly, "do you still have that bouquet?" "What bouquet?" Emily asked, confused. "Your bridal bouquet, the one you were going to use for your wedding to my son." The silence that followed was so heavy, Emily could hear her own heartbeat. She had kept that bouquet for 5 years, preserved in a glass dome in her apartment. It was a painful memory she'd never been able to let go of. "How do you know I still have it?" Emily asked weakly. "Because I know what it's like to love someone and never forget," Mrs. Barbara replied, surprising everyone with her honesty. "And because I know the kind of person you are. You hold on to what matters." Jessica looked back and forth between them, trying to understand their dynamic. "What bouquet are you talking about?" the bride asked. Emily took a deep breath. She lived just 2 blocks from the flower shop, and her apartment keys were in her purse. She could fetch the bouquet and be back in less than 15 minutes. "I have a bouquet of white roses at home," Emily explained to Jessica. "It's identical to the one you were supposed to have. I can go get it." "Why do you have a bouquet just like mine?" Jessica asked, still confused. It was Mrs. Barbara who answered, "Because it was meant for her wedding to my son. A wedding I sabotaged." Her words landed like a bomb in the room. Emily felt her legs go weak. In 5 years, she'd never heard Brandon's mother admit any responsibility for their breakup. "Mom, what are you saying?" Jessica asked, visibly shocked. "I'm saying I made a mistake," Mrs. Barbara continued, looking straight at Emily. "A mistake my son is still paying for, and apparently so are you." Emily leaned against the counter for support. Her hands trembled as she processed what she was hearing. You ended our relationship?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. "I convinced Brandon you two had no future together," Mrs. Barbara admitted. "Told him a florist would never be accepted in our family, that he needed someone from his own social standing. I pressured him until he broke it off." Melissa, who had stayed quiet until then, stepped forward. "That's why I switched the bouquet," she said, glaring at Mrs. Barbara. "Because I knew people like you only bring pain to good people like Emily." Jessica was pale, taking in all the revelations. She sat back down, holding her head in her hands. "So Brandon didn't leave me because he loved me less," Emily murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "He left because he was pressured." "And now he's marrying someone you chose for him," added Jessica, looking at her mother-in-law with an expression that mixed hurt and understanding. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell lowered her head, seeming to carry the weight of years of regret. "Jessica, you're a wonderful young woman," she said sincerely. "But I know Brandon never completely forgot Emily, and that isn't fair to either of you." Jessica's phone began to ring. She looked at the screen and saw it was Brandon calling for the 5th time in a row. "It's him," she said, showing the phone to the others. "What should I say?" "The truth," replied Emily, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "But first, I'll go get the bouquet. You deserve to marry with the most beautiful flowers, regardless of all this." "Emily, you don't have to do this," said Jessica, looking at her gratefully. "After everything I've found out." "I do," Emily interrupted. "Not for him, but for you. And for me too. I need to do the right thing." Emily grabbed her keys and headed for the door, but stopped and looked at Melissa. "When I get back, we're going to have a serious talk about what you did," she said firmly. "What happened between Brandon and me doesn't justify harming an innocent client." "Yes, Mrs. Parker," murmured Melissa, knowing she had been wrong. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Emily left the flower shop almost running. As she walked through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where she had grown up, 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. 5 years of questioning, of wondering if she hadn't been good enough, if she had done something wrong. And now she discovered none of it had been true. She arrived at her apartment on the 2nd floor of an old but well-kept building. It was a small but cozy place, decorated with dried flowers and plants she grew on the windowsills. In the bedroom, on the dresser, was the glass dome that held her bridal bouquet. Emily paused in front of it for a moment. The white roses were perfectly preserved, still beautiful after all these years. She had spent a fortune on the special treatment to keep them intact, a memento of a future that never happened. Carefully, she removed the dome and picked up the bouquet. The soft scent of the roses was still there, mixed with the aroma of the preservative she had used. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember how happy she had been when she prepared it, imagining the day she would walk down the aisle of St. Mary's Cathedral toward Brandon. But now was not the time for nostalgia. A young woman needed her help, and Emily wasn't going to fail her. She hurried back to the flower shop, holding the bouquet carefully to avoid damaging the petals. When she entered, she found a scene she hadn't expected. Jessica was on the phone with Brandon, and from the conversation Emily could overhear, he was angry. "No, Brandon, I can't explain over the phone," Jessica was saying. "It's too complicated. I just need a few more minutes. Yes, I know the guests are waiting. No, it's not a problem with the dress." Mrs. Barbara Mitchell sat in one of the chairs, deep in thought, while Melissa arranged some flowers in the back of the shop, clearly trying to keep busy. Emily walked in and held up the bouquet. Even Mrs. Barbara, who was trying to maintain her composure, was visibly moved at the sight of it. "It's exactly as I remember," murmured the mother-in-law. "You always had a special talent for choosing the right flowers." Jessica hung up the phone and looked at the bouquet in Emily's hands. It was truly perfect. The roses were the ideal size, the lace and pearl details added a delicate touch, and the arrangement was flawless. "It's beautiful," said Jessica sincerely, "but I can't accept it." "Why?" asked Emily, surprised. "Because this bouquet represents your love," replied Jessica firmly. "It would be wrong for me to use something so important to you at my wedding." Emily looked at the bouquet, then at Jessica. There was something in the young woman's expression that made her realize this wasn't just politeness. There was deep sadness there, a resignation Emily recognized all too well. "Jessica," Emily said gently, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Do you love Brandon?" The question caught Jessica off guard. She glanced at Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, then at Melissa, as if searching for support to answer. I thought I did," Jessica began, then stopped. "But now, after everything I've learned today—" "You have doubts?" Emily asked with understanding. "I do," Jessica admitted finally. "And it's not fair to anyone to marry with doubts, is it?" Mrs. Barbara Mitchell rose from her chair and walked over to Jessica, placing her hands on her future daughter-in-law's shoulders. "Sweetheart, if you're unsure, perhaps you should talk to Brandon before the ceremony," she suggested kindly. "Talk about what?" Jessica asked. "That I've realized he never got over his ex, that he's only marrying me because his family approved. How would that help anything?" Emily felt a pang of guilt. Her presence was clearly causing trouble for Jessica. "Maybe I should leave," Emily said. "Let you all handle this as a family." "No," Jessica said quickly. "Please stay. You're the only one here who understands what I'm going through." "How so?" Emily asked. "You truly loved him," Jessica replied. "And you were kept apart for reasons that had nothing to do with your feelings. I'm in the opposite situation. I'm being pushed to stay with him for reasons that also have nothing to do with love." Emily had never thought of it that way, but Jessica was right. Both of them had been manipulated by the same family, just in different ways. "And how do you feel about that?" Emily asked. "Tired," Jessica sighed. "Tired of trying to win over someone who may never be fully mine. Tired of competing with a memory." Jessica's words struck a chord in Emily's heart. She understood exactly what the young woman was feeling. "May I share something with you?" Emily said. "Something I've learned these past 5 years." "Of course." "You can't force someone to love you completely if their heart is divided," Emily said with hard-earned wisdom. "And trying will only make you miserable." Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. "So what do I do? 200 guests are at St. Mary's Cathedral. Both families are there. If I don't show up, it'll be a scandal." "Sometimes causing a scandal is better than living an unhappy life," Emily replied. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, who had been silent, finally spoke up. "Emily is right," she said. "I pushed my son into a situation that didn't make him happy. I won't let you suffer for my mistakes too." "But what about the family? What will people say?" Jessica asked. "People will talk for a few weeks, then forget," Mrs. Barbara Mitchell answered. "But an unhappy marriage lasts a lifetime." Just then the doorbell rang again. This time it was Brandon himself. He strode into the flower shop, visibly upset. Dressed in a flawless tuxedo, his hair perfectly combed, his expression was far from that of a happy groom. "Jessica, for heaven's sake, what's going on?" he said, before even noticing who else was in the shop. When his eyes met Emily's, he froze completely. The color drained from his face, and he stood frozen in the middle of the shop as if he'd seen a ghost. "Emily?" he murmured, as though he couldn't believe his eyes. "Hello, Brandon," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The silence that followed was awkward. Brandon looked from Emily to Jessica, trying to make sense of the situation. "Can someone explain why my fiancé is at my ex-girlfriend's flower shop on our wedding day?" he asked, a mix of confusion and irritation in his voice. "It's a long story," Jessica said wearily. "Then tell me quickly, because the guests are getting impatient," Brandon replied, glancing at his watch. Emily studied Brandon as he spoke, He looked more mature now, his face slightly fuller, a few streaks of grey in his hair, but he was still the same man she'd fallen for years ago. Seeing him there, annoyed that the guests were waiting, reminded her why their relationship had sometimes been so difficult. "Brandon, Mrs." Barbara Mitchell interrupted Emily's thoughts. "Sit down, we need to talk." "Mom, this isn't the time for a chat," Brandon protested. "It's time to go to St. Mary's Cathedral." "Son," Mrs. Mitchell said firmly, "sit." His mother's tone carried an authority Brandon knew well. He reluctantly took a seat, but kept checking his watch. "First, I owe Emily an apology," Mrs. Mitchell began, "and you need to know the truth about what happened 5 years ago." "What truth?" Brandon asked, finally paying attention. Emily was surprised to see Mrs. Mitchell taking the lead. In all the years she'd dated Brandon, her mother-in-law had never shown any interest in clearing up misunderstandings. "The truth is, I manipulated you into breaking up with Emily," Mrs. Mitchell confessed. "I convinced you she wasn't right for our family, that you two had no future together." Brandon looked from his mother to Emily, as if processing something entirely new. "What do you mean you manipulated me?" he asked quietly. "Remember when I kept bringing up the social differences between you?" his mother continued. "How hard it would be for her to adapt to our social circle, how you needed to think about your future children." Brandon nodded slowly. Emily remembered those conversations too. Brandon would always come home upset after talking to his mother, questioning whether their relationship had a real future. "All of that was just an excuse," Mrs. Mitchell admitted. "I was afraid of losing my son to someone I couldn't control. Emily was too independent, too strong-willed. I knew if you married her, she wouldn't let me interfere in your lives." "Mom," Brandon murmured, visibly shaken. "And I was right," Mrs. Mitchell went on, looking at Emily with something resembling respect. "Emily would never have let me control you the way I control you and Jessica now." Jessica, who had stayed quiet the whole time, finally spoke. "It's true," she said, looking at Brandon. "Your mother picks everything from our wedding flowers to where we go on our honeymoon, and you let her." Brandon flushed, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. "Jessica, that's not entirely true," he protested. "Isn't it?" Jessica asked, a bitterness in her voice that Emily recognized. "Then tell me, how many decisions about our wedding were actually yours?" Brandon opened his mouth to reply, but closed it again. Emily could see in his eyes that Jessica had hit the mark. "That doesn't matter now," Brandon said, trying to change the subject. "What matters is that we're late for our own ceremony." "Brandon," said Emily, speaking for the first time since he had arrived, "do you really want to get married today?" The question caught Brandon completely off guard. He looked at Emily with an expression that mixed surprise, hurt, and something she couldn't quite identify. "Of course I do," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you sure?" Emily pressed. "Because the way you're acting, it seems like you're more worried about the guests than the bride." "That's none of your business," Brandon snapped, harsher than he intended. "You're right," Emily agreed, "but it is hers." She pointed to Jessica, who had been watching the entire exchange with a thoughtful expression. "Jessica," Emily said, turning to the bride, "do you still want to marry him?" All eyes turned to Jessica. She was silent for a long moment, looking at Brandon, then at Emily's bouquet, then at her own hands. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "Up until an hour ago I thought I did. But now—" "Now what?" Brandon asked, his irritation growing. "Now I've found out you never got over your ex," Jessica answered with brutal honesty. "That your mother manipulated you into breaking up. That our entire relationship might have just been your second choice." Brandon fell silent, but Emily could see the struggle in his eyes. There was truth in what Jessica had said, and he knew it. "Jessica, that's not true," Brandon said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Jessica stood up from her chair. "Then look me in the eyes and tell me you love me more than anyone else you've ever loved." Brandon looked at Jessica, then at Emily, then back at Jessica. The hesitation was clear to everyone in the room. He began, but couldn't finish. "That's what I thought," Jessica said with resigned sadness. "You can't even say you love me completely." Emily's heart ached at the pain in Jessica's voice. It was the same kind of hurt she had felt 5 years ago when she realized Brandon was pulling away from her. "Jessica," Emily said, stepping closer to the younger woman, "you deserve someone who wouldn't hesitate for even a second to say they love you more than anything in the world." "I know," Jessica replied, tears in her eyes. "Deep down, I always knew. But I kept hoping he'd change, that he'd learn to love me the way I loved him." "And did you ever truly love him?" Emily asked gently. Jessica took a moment before answering. "I loved the idea of him," she admitted. "I loved the stability he represented, the security, the family's approval. But the man himself, I don't think I ever really knew him." Brandon looked as if he were listening to a conversation about someone else. His gaze shifted between the two women as if seeing them for the first time. "You're talking like I'm not even here," he finally said. "Are you?" Emily asked, locking eyes with him. "Are you really here, present, or are you just fulfilling another obligation your family forced on you?" Emily's question hit Brandon like a punch. He was silent for a long moment, clearly reflecting on his own motivations. He began, but was interrupted by his phone ringing. "It must be the priest," Mrs. Barbara Mitchell said, "or one of the groomsmen asking where you are." Brandon checked the screen and confirmed it was the priest from St. Mary's Cathedral. "So now what?" he asked, looking at Jessica. "What do I tell him?" "The truth," Jessica replied, with a calm that surprised everyone. "That the bride needs more time to think." "Jessica, you can't do this," Brandon protested. "There are 200 guests, both families. The money that's been spent." "The money that was spent is no reason to ruin two people's lives," Mrs. Barbara Mitchell interrupted, surprising everyone with the firmness in her voice. Brandon looked at his mother as if she were a stranger. "Since when do you think like this?" he asked. "Since today," Mrs. Barbara replied. "Since I saw the suffering my interference caused for two people I should have respected." Emily was stunned by the change in Mrs. Barbara's attitude. The woman she had known years ago would never admit she was wrong, much less apologize publicly. "Mrs. Barbara," Emily said, "why are you doing this now? Why tell the truth after so long?" "Because I've watched my son be unhappy for the last 5 years," her mother-in-law answered honestly. "He was never the same after he broke up with you. And when he met Jessica, I thought he might recover, but..." "But what?" Jessica asked. "But I realized he was just trying to convince himself he could be happy with someone else," Mrs. Barbara finished. "And that isn't fair to either of you." Brandon seemed to be processing years of self-deception in just minutes. He stood up from his chair and began pacing the small flower shop. "So, what do you want me to do?" he asked, frustrated. "Call off the wedding? Humiliate Jessica in front of everyone?" "Brandon," Jessica said, with a kindness Emily found admirable, "you won't humiliate me. I just can't marry someone who isn't sure he wants me." "But I do want you," Brandon protested, though his voice didn't even sound convincing to himself. "Want or need?" Jessica asked. "Because those are very different things." The question hung in the air. Brandon stopped pacing and looked at Jessica as if seeing her for the first time. "I don't know how to answer that," he finally admitted. "Then you have your answer," Jessica said with quiet sadness. "And I have mine." Melissa, who had stayed silent the whole time, finally stepped closer to the group. "Mrs. Parker," she said hesitantly, "can I speak with you?" "Not now, Melissa," Emily replied, not taking her eyes off Brandon and Jessica. "It's important," Melissa insisted. "It's about everything that's happening." Emily looked at her employee carefully. There was something in Melissa's expression that made her realize she had something important to say. "All right," Emily said. "Go ahead." I lied about switching the bouquet by accident," Melissa confessed, blushing. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, confused. "I switched them on purpose," Melissa admitted. "But it wasn't just to protect you. It was because I'm Brandon's cousin." The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone stared at Melissa in shock. "You're what?" Emily asked, feeling as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. "A distant cousin," Melissa explained nervously. "My mother and Brandon's mother are cousins." I always knew who he was, but I never said anything because I didn't want you to fire me. Melissa, Emily said, trying to stay calm. You've worked for me for 15 years. Why did you never mention this? Because when I started here, you were just beginning your relationship with him, Melissa explained. And later, when I saw how much you suffered after the breakup, I was angry at the whole family, even at myself for not doing anything to defend you back then. Brandon looked at Melissa as if trying to remember her. Melissa Johnson? He asked. Aunt Deborah's daughter? That's right, Melissa confirmed, lowering her head. My God, Brandon murmured. How long have you worked here? 15 years, Melissa answered. I watched you cry over him for months. I saw how she had to rebuild her entire life after you abandoned her. I didn't abandon her, Brandon protested. Of course you did, Melissa retorted, her courage renewed. She was planning the wedding, had even picked out names for your children, and out of nowhere you showed up saying it wasn't working anymore. Emily felt a pang in her chest as she remembered those days. Melissa was right. Brandon had simply appeared one day and said they needed to take a break because things were too complicated. That's exactly how it happened, Emily confirmed, looking at Brandon. You never gave me a real explanation. Because I didn't know how to explain, Brandon said, finally showing some emotion. My mother kept going on about our differences, about how hard it would be for you to adjust. I started doubting everything. So you chose to give up on us, Emily said, bitterness in her voice. I thought I was doing what was best for you, Brandon replied. I thought you'd suffer less if I left your life quickly. And you thought you'd suffer less too? Emily asked. Brandon fell silent, but the answer was written on his face. No, he admitted quietly. I suffered a lot, all these years. Jessica, who had been watching the entire exchange between Brandon and Emily, stood up from her chair. See, she said, looking at Brandon, this is what I was talking about. You never let yourself move on because you two never truly resolved things. Jessica, Brandon began. No, Jessica interrupted, raising her hand. Let me finish. I spent 2 years of my life trying to win the heart of a man who was never fully available. And that's not your fault, not Emily's, not mine. It's the fault of whoever manipulated the whole situation. She looked directly at Mrs. Barbara Mitchell. But now that the truth is out, I won't keep pretending I don't see it, Jessica continued. You two have unfinished business, and as long as that's the case, I'll always be competing with a memory. So, what are you saying? Brandon asked. I'm saying I won't marry you today, Jessica replied with a firmness that stunned everyone. And I'm saying you need to figure out what you really want in life without anyone else's influence. Mrs. Barbara approached Jessica and placed her hands on her future daughter-in-law's shoulders. Sweetheart, are you sure? She asked with genuine concern. This is a huge decision. I'm sure, Jessica answered. For the first time in a long time, I'm sure about something. Emily watched the scene with a mix of admiration and sadness. Jessica was doing what she wished she'd had the courage to do years ago, refusing to settle for scraps of love. Jessica, Emily said, you're a very brave woman. I'm not brave, Jessica replied. I'm just tired of trying to be someone I'm not to win over someone who might never be fully mine. Brandon seemed to be in shock. He stared at Jessica as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But what about the guests, our families? He asked, still focused on the practical matters. The families will understand, Mrs. Barbara said, and if they don't, that's their problem. I'll explain to everyone that this was my fault. Mom, you don't have to do that, Brandon said. Yes, I do, Mrs. Barbara replied. It's the least I can do after everything I caused. Jessica picked up the wilted bouquet from the counter and handed it to Emily. This one is yours, she said, as a reminder that sometimes bad endings lead to better beginnings. What about the other bouquet? Emily asked, pointing to the bridal bouquet she had brought from home. Jessica looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and offered it back to Emily. That one belongs to you, she said. It always was. Maybe it's time to decide what to do with it. Emily Parker picked up the bouquet and held it carefully. It was strange to have in her hands again something that represented so many lost dreams. Thank you, Emily said to Jessica, for everything, for helping me see some things more clearly. I should be thanking you, Jessica replied. You helped me find the courage to do what was right. Brandon Mitchell remained still in the middle of the flower shop, clearly lost about what to do next. And now? He asked, to no one in particular. Now you go to St. Mary's Cathedral and explain the situation to the guests, said Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, with dignity and honesty. And then, Brandon insisted, then you'll figure out who you really are when no one is dictating what you should do, Emily replied. Brandon looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't fully decipher. Emily, he said, can you forgive me for the way I ended things between us? Emily took a deep breath. It was a question she had waited 5 years to hear, but now that it was finally being asked, she wasn't sure of the answer. Brandon, she said at last, forgiving and forgetting are two different things. I can forgive the circumstances, but I can't forget what I've learned. What did you learn? He asked. That I deserve someone who fights for me, Emily answered. Someone who doesn't give up on us at the first sign of trouble. Someone who chooses me every day, not just when it's easy. Emily's words hung in the air. Brandon lowered his head, clearly understanding the message. You're right, he admitted. I should have fought for us. Yes, you should have, Emily agreed. But you didn't. And now it's too late to change the past. What about the future? Brandon asked, a hesitant hope in his voice. Emily looked at him, then at Jessica, then at Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, then at Melissa. Everyone waited for her answer. The future, Emily said slowly, is something each of us has to build with our own hands. No manipulations, no pressures, no fear. Does that mean there's no chance for us? Brandon pressed. It means, Emily replied, that if one day you decide you truly want me in your life, you'll have to win me back. From scratch, as if we'd never met. Because the man who abandoned me 5 years ago isn't someone I want back. What if I've changed? Brandon asked. Then you'll have to prove it, Emily said firmly. Not with words, but with actions. And not to impress me, but because you've truly changed. Jessica smiled for the first time since arriving at the flower shop. Now you're talking like someone who knows her worth, she told Emily. I learned from a very wise woman, Emily replied, looking at Jessica warmly. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell approached Emily, clearly nervous. Emily, she said, I know I have no right to ask for anything after all I've done, but go ahead, Emily said. Can you forgive me too? Her mother-in-law asked. I know I don't deserve it, but... Emily looked at the woman who had been her greatest adversary for years. Now she saw not a calculating villain, but a mother who had made mistakes out of fear of losing her son. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell, Emily said, I do forgive you, but on one condition. What is it? Her mother-in-law asked hopefully. That you let your son make his own decisions from now on, Emily replied. That you trust him to choose what's best for his life. I promise, Mrs. Barbara Mitchell said sincerely. Brandon picked up his phone, which had been ringing insistently. It's the priest again, he said. I need to go there and explain the situation. Do you want me to come with you? Jessica asked. You'd do that? Brandon asked, surprised. Of course, Jessica replied. I won't let you face this alone. But afterward, everyone goes their own way. Brandon nodded, clearly grateful for the offer. Emily, he said before leaving, thank you for everything, for helping me see things more clearly. You're welcome, Emily replied. Good luck, Brandon. To you too, he said, and for the first time in years, Emily felt he was being completely sincere. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. After Brandon, Jessica, and Mrs. Barbara Mitchell left, the flower shop felt strangely quiet. Emily was alone with Melissa and her own thoughts. Mrs. Parker, Melissa said, breaking the silence, are you going to fire me? Emily looked at the employee who had stood by her side for so many years. Melissa had made a mistake by switching the bouquet, but Emily understood her reasons. I won't fire you, Emily said, but I don't want any more secrets between us. If there's anything else I should know, tell me now. "There's nothing else," Melissa assured her. "I just wanted to protect you, even if I went about it the wrong way." "Melissa," Emily said, sitting in one of the chairs, "I know you care about me and I appreciate that, but you can't make decisions for me even if you think you're protecting me." "I know," Melissa admitted. "It was selfish of me too. I didn't want to see you hurt again." "But pain is part of life," Emily said wisely. "And sometimes facing what hurts us is the only way to move past it." Melissa nodded, understanding the lesson. "What will you do now?" she asked. Emily looked at the wilted bouquet in her hands, then at the preserved one she had brought from home. "Now, I'll do what I should have done 5 years ago," she said. "What's that?" Melissa asked curiously. "I'll forgive myself for not being strong enough to fight for what I wanted," Emily replied. "And I'll learn to value myself the way I deserve." Emily stood and walked to the flower shop window. Outside, life went on as usual. People passed by on the sidewalk, cars moved toward their destinations. The world kept turning as if nothing had happened. But for her, everything had changed. For the first time in 5 years, Emily felt she had closed an important chapter in her life. Not the way she had imagined, not with a movie-perfect happy ending, but with something far more valuable, clarity about who she was and what she wanted. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. "Hello, Samantha," she said when her friend answered. "It's me, Emily. Do you have time to talk today? Something interesting happened at the flower shop." Samantha had been her best friend since their teens, the only person who had been there through all the pain Emily endured after her breakup with Brandon. "Of course," Samantha replied excitedly. "Tell me everything." "In person would be better," Emily said. "Can you come to the shop, or if you'd like I can close early and we can grab coffee?" "I'll be right there," Samantha said. "I'll see you in 20 minutes." Emily hung up and felt lighter. It was time to share this experience with someone who truly cared about her. "Melissa," Emily said, "can you stay another hour? Samantha is coming, and I'd like to talk with her." "Of course, Mrs. Parker," Melissa replied. "I'll organize the stock in the back and let you two talk in peace." 20 minutes later, Samantha arrived at the flower shop with a smile and a warm hug for her friend. "So," she said, sitting in one of the chairs, "what happened that's so interesting?" Emily told her the whole story, from Jessica arriving with the wilted bouquet to Mrs. Barbara Mitchell's revelation and Jessica's decision not to marry. "I can't believe it," exclaimed Samantha when Emily finished. "After 5 years, you finally had the conversation you needed to have." "Yes," agreed Emily, "and it was liberating in a way I didn't expect." "How so?" asked Samantha. "I always thought if we ever met again, I'd either want to get back with him or hate him completely," explained Emily. "But something different happened. I was able to see him for who he really is, a man who still doesn't know who he wants to be." "And do you still feel anything for him?" Samantha asked directly. Emily thought for a moment before answering. "I feel affection," she said finally. "I feel nostalgia for the good times we shared, but I don't feel that desperate need to be with him like I used to." "That's real progress," Samantha observed. "It is," Emily agreed. "And you know what else? I was proud of myself today. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what to say and how to act." "How so?" asked Samantha. "I helped Jessica find the courage to do what was right for her," explained Emily, "even knowing it might mean Brandon would be free to try and come back to me." "And does that scare you?" Samantha asked. "No," Emily replied, surprised by her own certainty. "Because now I know if he tries to come back, it has to be for the right reasons. And if it is, great. If not, that's fine too." Samantha smiled proudly at her friend. "You've grown so much, Emily," she said. 5 years ago, you would have done anything to have him back." 5 years ago, I thought I needed him to be happy," Emily said. "Today I know I can be happy on my own, and that changes everything." "What about Jessica?" Samantha asked. "Do you think she'll be okay?" "She will," Emily said with conviction. "She's stronger than she thinks, and wiser too. She understood something it took me years to learn." "What's that?" asked Samantha. "That it's better to be alone than with someone who doesn't fully value you," Emily replied. The two friends talked for another hour, analyzing every aspect of what had happened. When Samantha left, Emily felt renewed. Melissa appeared from the back of the shop carrying a large batch of flowers she'd been sorting. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "what are you going to do with these 2 bouquets?" Emily looked at them. The wilted one represented disappointment and manipulation. The preserved one stood for dreams that never came true, but also hope and the ability to create beautiful things. "You know what I'm going to do," Emily said with a smile. "I'm going to use them for something special." "What's that?" Melissa asked. "I'll take them apart and use the flowers to make new arrangements," said Emily. "Different, unique ones that represent who I am now." "What a lovely idea," Melissa said, smiling. Emily got to work right away. Carefully, she undid both bouquets, separating each flower, each leaf, every decorative detail. From the wilted roses, she salvaged a few elements that still had charm. From the preserved roses, she used most, but mixed them with fresh flowers from the shop. As she worked, Emily reflected on how this was the perfect metaphor for her life. She was taking pieces of the past, both good and bad, and creating something entirely new. 2 hours later, she'd made 3 different arrangements. One to keep in the flower shop, one to take home, and a third she decided to donate. "Who's that one for?" Melissa asked, pointing to the third. "For St. Mary's Cathedral nearby," Emily said, "so others can enjoy the beauty, even if they don't know the story behind it." "That's such a kind gesture," Melissa remarked. That night, when Emily closed the flower shop and headed home, she felt different. Lighter, more centered, more in control of herself. In her apartment, she placed the arrangement she had made in the spot where the dome with the preserved bouquet used to be. It was an important symbolic change. Emily prepared some tea, sat in the living room armchair and turned on the TV. But before choosing what to watch, she picked up her phone and sent a message to Jessica. "Hi Jessica, it's Emily from the flower shop. I hope you're doing okay. If you want to talk or need anything, I'll be here. You're an amazing woman and I'm sure you'll find all the happiness you deserve." The reply came a few minutes later. "Hi Emily, thanks for the message. It's been a tough day, but I feel at peace with the decision I made. You helped me a lot today. I hope we can stay in touch. I have a feeling our friendship is just beginning." Emily smiled as she read the message. It was strange to think she had gained a friend under such unusual circumstances, but life sometimes surprised you in unexpected ways. In the days that followed, Emily resumed her routine at the flower shop, but with renewed energy. She reorganized some aspects of the business, created new arrangements, and started planning an expansion she'd been putting off for years. Melissa noticed the change in her boss and commented several times on how Emily seemed more confident and decisive. A week after the incident with the bouquet, Emily received an unexpected visitor at the flower shop. It was Jessica, but she looked different. She was wearing casual clothes, her hair was down, and there was a sparkle in her eyes that Emily hadn't seen on the day of the cancelled wedding. "Hi, Emily," Jessica said, entering the shop with a genuine smile. "Hi, Jessica," Emily replied, happy to see her. "How are you?" "Good," Jessica said. "Actually better than I thought I'd be." "That's great to hear," Emily said. "And Brandon, how's he handling everything?" "I don't know," Jessica answered honestly. "We haven't spoken since that day. I thought it was best to give each other some time to process everything." "That makes sense," Emily agreed. "Actually, I came here to thank you," Jessica said, "and to ask you something." "Go ahead," Emily replied. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to make some arrangements for an event I'm organizing," Jessica said. "It's a gathering for women who've gone through difficult separations or divorces. It'll be held at a community center nearby." Emily was touched by the request. "Of course I'll do it," she said. "It's a beautiful project." "It's something I've always wanted to do," Jessica explained. "But when I was engaged, I never had the time or energy to focus on personal projects. Now I do." "And are you enjoying this freedom?" Emily asked. "I love it," Jessica replied enthusiastically. "I'm discovering things about myself I didn't even know existed." The two talked for over an hour about Jessica's project, about flowers, about life in general. Emily realized Jessica truly was a special person, and was glad she had found the courage to follow her own path. 2 weeks later, Emily was preparing the arrangements for Jessica's event when Brandon showed up at the flower shop. He looked different too, less formal, more relaxed, though Emily could tell he was still processing changes in his life. "Hi, Emily," he said, a little hesitant. "Hi, Brandon," Emily replied, continuing to work with the flowers. "How are you?" "Confused," he admitted, with an honesty that surprised her, "but trying to figure some things out about myself." "That's good," Emily said. "Self-discovery is always positive." Brandon stepped closer to the counter where Emily was working. "Can I ask what those arrangements are for?" he said. "For an event Jessica's organizing," Emily replied. "A gathering for women who've been through tough times." "Typical of her," said Brandon with a sad smile. "Always thinking of others." "It's a beautiful quality," Emily remarked. "It is," Brandon agreed. "One of the many qualities I failed to appreciate." Emily stopped working and looked at Brandon. "Brandon," she said, "can I give you some advice?" "Of course." "Stop blaming yourself for what happened," Emily said. "What's done is done. What matters now is what you do from here on out." "And what do you think I should do?" Brandon asked. Emily took a deep breath before answering. "I think you should figure out who you really are when no one's telling you what to do," she said. "You should explore your own interests, your own passions, your own opinions." "And then?" Brandon asked. "Then you'll know better what you want from life," Emily replied. "And once you do, you'll be able to make more thoughtful decisions about relationships." Brandon was silent for a moment, processing Emily's words. "Emily," he finally said, "do you think that someday, maybe we—" "Brandon," Emily gently but firmly interrupted, "don't think about that now. Focus on yourself first." "But what if, after I know myself better, I want to try again with you?" Brandon insisted. "If it's meant to be, it will be," Emily replied. "But it has to be for the right reasons at the right time." "And how will I know if they're the right reasons?" Brandon asked. "When you want me, not because I represent something you lost, but because of who I am today," Emily answered. "And when I want you not because you represent security or nostalgia, but because you've become someone I truly admire." Brandon nodded, seeming to grasp the depth of what Emily was saying. "Thank you," he said, "for being so wise about all this." "You're welcome," Emily replied. "And Brandon, good luck on your journey of self-discovery." After Brandon left, Emily went back to her floral arrangements, feeling gratified that she'd managed to have such a mature and balanced conversation with him. Jessica's event was a success. Emily personally delivered the arrangements and was impressed by the care and organization Jessica had put into every detail. "The arrangements are perfect," Jessica said, hugging Emily. "Thank you for being part of this." "Thank you for including me," Emily replied. "It's a beautiful project." During the event, Emily met several women who had gone through experiences similar to hers and Jessica's. Hearing their stories made her realize how much she had grown and strengthened. One of the attendees, a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Rosemary, approached Emily. "You're the florist Jessica talks so much about?" she asked. "I am," Emily replied. "She told us your story," Mrs. Rosemary said. "How you helped her find the courage to make the right decision." "Actually, I think it was the other way around," Emily said. "She helped me a lot too." "That's beautiful to see," Mrs. Rosemary remarked. "Women supporting each other instead of competing." "It's the only way we truly grow," Emily agreed. That night, when she returned home, Emily felt deeply grateful for everything that had happened. The incident with the wilted bouquet had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. Months passed. Emily expanded the flower shop, began offering floral arrangement classes, and developed a partnership with Jessica to provide flowers for the charity events she organized. Brandon stopped by the flower shop occasionally, always polite, always respectful. Emily could see he was genuinely working on himself, and that made her happy for him. One day, nearly a year after the bouquet incident, Emily was closing the flower shop when she got a call from Jessica. "Emily," said Jessica, her voice excited, "do you have a minute?" "Of course," replied Emily. "What's going on?" I have some news to share, Jessica said. I met someone. Emily smiled at the joy in her friend's voice. Tell me everything, she said. He's one of the volunteers at our events, Jessica explained. His name is Nathan. He's a psychologist who works with group therapy. And Emily, he looks at me like I'm the only woman in the world. That's wonderful, Jessica, Emily said, genuinely happy. How did you two meet? He came to one of the events to give a talk about new beginnings, Jessica shared. Afterward, we kept talking about the projects, about life, and we realized we have so much in common. And how do you feel? Emily asked. Completely different from how I felt with Brandon, Jessica replied. It's all more natural, easier, more real. I'm so happy for you, Emily said. And you? Jessica asked. How are things? Good, Emily answered. Really good, actually. I'm building the life I always wanted. What about Brandon? Jessica asked curiously. He's been stopping by now and then, Emily said. I think he's still figuring himself out, but I can see he's growing. And you? Do you still have feelings for him? Jessica pressed. Emily took a moment before answering. I care about him, she said, but it's not that desperate feeling from before. It's something calmer, more mature. Do you think there could ever be something between you two again? Jessica insisted. I don't know, Emily replied honestly. And you know what? I don't worry about it anymore. If it's meant to happen, it will happen naturally. If not, that's okay too. You've changed so much, Jessica observed. We both have, Emily agreed. And I think it's for the better. The two chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. When Emily hung up, she felt deeply grateful to have Jessica as a friend. 2 weeks later, Emily was preparing a special birthday arrangement for Mrs. Rosemary, the woman she'd met at Jessica's event, when Brandon walked into the flower shop. This time, there was something different in his demeanor. He seemed more confident, more grounded. Hi, Emily, he said with a genuine smile. Hi, Brandon, Emily replied. How are you? Good, he said. Actually, I came here with a proposal. What kind of proposal? Emily asked, curious but cautious. I wanted to invite you to dinner, Brandon said. Not as an attempt to restart a relationship, but as a chance to get to know each other again. Emily stopped working and looked at him carefully. There was something different in his eyes, a sincerity she hadn't seen in years. Brandon, she said slowly, why now? Because I finally understood what you meant about knowing myself better, Brandon replied. I've spent all this time working on myself, going to therapy, exploring my own interests, and now I know who I am when no one else is influencing me. And who are you? Emily asked. I'm someone who values honesty above all, Brandon said. Someone who doesn't care what others think as long as I'm doing what's right for me. Someone who's learned to fight for what I want. And what do you want? Emily asked, though she suspected the answer. I want a chance to get to know you again, Brandon said. For you to know me again. No pressure, no expectations. Just to see who we are now. Emily studied him for a long moment. She could see he had truly changed. There was a maturity in him that hadn't been there before, a self-awareness that was compelling. One chance, Emily finally said. Just one chance. That's all I'm asking, Brandon replied with a smile. But with some conditions, Emily added. What conditions? Brandon asked. First, let's take it slow, said Emily. Very slow, as if we were two people who had never met before. I agree, said Brandon. Dine a second. No expectations about where this might lead, Emily continued. It might work out, it might not, and that's okay. I agree, Brandon repeated. Third, if at any point I realize you're still the same man who left me because Mommy told you to, I'll walk away and there won't be a second chance, Emily concluded. I agree, Brandon said for the third time. And Emily? Yes? Thank you for giving me this chance, he said. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll do everything to prove I've really changed. Emily smiled, feeling a mix of nervousness and hope. Saturday night? Brandon asked. Saturday night, Emily confirmed. After Brandon left, Emily was alone with her thoughts. It was frightening and exciting all at once. She had become a different person, stronger, more aware of her own worth. And if Brandon had changed too, maybe there was a real chance for them. But if he hadn't, she was ready for that as well. Because now she knew she was perfectly capable of being happy on her own. On Friday evening, Emily called Jessica to tell her about Brandon's invitation. "So," Jessica asked, curious, "are you going?" "I am," Emily replied, "but with no expectations." "How are you feeling?" Jessica asked. "Strangely calm," Emily answered. "A year ago I'd have been desperate, analyzing every word he said, imagining scenarios. Now I'm just curious." "That's a really good sign," Jessica noted. "Yeah," Emily agreed. "It shows I've really changed." "And if it works out between you two?" Jessica asked. "If it does, it'll be because we're different people than we were before," Emily replied. "And if it doesn't, that's okay too. My happiness doesn't depend on him." "I'm proud of you," Jessica said. "I'm proud of me too," Emily answered, and she meant it. The dinner happened on Saturday at a small, cozy restaurant neither of them had been to before. Brandon had deliberately chosen a neutral place, free of past memories. The conversation flowed naturally. They talked about work, their projects, the changes they'd been through. Emily was impressed by how genuinely different Brandon seemed. He listened more, talked less about himself, and showed real interest in her thoughts. "Emily," Brandon said at the end of the evening, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emily replied. "Do you feel like I'm a different person than I was before?" he asked. Emily thought carefully before answering. "I feel like you're more aware of who you are," she said, "and that makes all the difference." "And does that attract you?" Brandon asked, vulnerability in his voice. "Yes," Emily answered honestly. "It does. But Brandon, I need you to understand something." "What is it?" he asked. "I've changed too," Emily said. "I'm not the woman who would accept anything just to keep a relationship. If we decide to try something, it has to be based on mutual respect and conscious choice." "I understand," Brandon said, "and that's exactly what I want." They said goodbye with a hug and a promise to talk during the week. In the months that followed, Emily and Brandon met several times, always unhurried, always respecting the pace Emily had set. Emily could see that Brandon had truly changed. He asked for her opinion before making big decisions, respected her when she said no, and took genuine interest in her projects. Most importantly, he had set clear boundaries with his own mother. Mrs. Barbara Mitchell was still part of his life, but no longer as a controlling force. 6 months after their first dinner, during one of their meetings, Brandon asked the question Emily had been waiting for. "Emily," he said, "how would you feel if we said we were dating?" Emily smiled. It was the right question, asked in the right way at the right time. "I'd feel good," she replied. "Really good." "So are we dating?" Brandon asked with a smile. "We're dating," Emily confirmed. It was a simple moment, without drama or grand declarations, but it was perfect because it represented everything they had learned about healthy relationships. A year later, Emily received a special invitation. It was Jessica's wedding to Nathan. "I want you to be my maid of honor," Jessica said when she handed her the invitation in person. "It would be an honor," Emily replied, touched. "And Emily," Jessica added, "I want you to make the bouquet." "Are you sure?" Emily asked. "We don't have the best history with wedding bouquets." Jessica laughed, remembering how it all began. "Exactly because of that," she said. "Our story with bouquets started rough, but look where we are now. It would be perfect if you made mine." Emily accepted, moved by her friend's trust. Jessica's wedding was everything the previous one hadn't been: simple, intimate, and full of real love. Emily created a unique bouquet, using flowers that symbolized new beginnings, growth, and true friendship. During the ceremony, Emily sat beside Brandon, who had also been invited. Seeing Jessica so happy, so fulfilled, made her reflect on how life sometimes takes us down paths we never imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Brandon whispered. "I'm thinking about how funny it is to see where life has brought us," Emily replied. 2 years ago, Jessica walked into my flower shop, crying over a wilted bouquet. Now she's marrying the love of her life and we're here together, but in a completely different way than before. Do you regret anything? Brandon asked. No, Emily answered without hesitation. Everything we went through brought us here, and here is really good. Brandon smiled and took Emily's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. It's really good for me too, he said. After the ceremony, during the reception, Emily was chatting with some guests when Mrs. Barbara Mitchell approached. Emily, her former mother-in-law said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Of course, Emily replied, stepping away from the group. I wanted to thank you, Mrs. Mitchell said. Thank me for what? Emily asked, surprised. For giving my son a second chance, Mrs. Mitchell replied, and for being the person you've always been, even after everything that happened. Mrs. Mitchell, you don't have to thank me, Emily said. Brandon has shown he's truly changed, and I've changed too. We're different people now. Better people, Mrs. Mitchell corrected, and I'm so happy you found your way back to each other. Thank you, Emily said. That means a lot coming from you. Later that night, as Emily and Brandon were heading home, she reflected on how whole she had felt all day, not just because she was with Brandon, but because she was at peace with herself and her choices. Brandon, she said, can I tell you something? Of course, he replied. Today I realized our story didn't start in that flower shop 2 years ago, Emily said. Our real story began when each of us decided to work on ourselves. What do you mean? Brandon asked. What we had 5 years ago was based on need and dependence, Emily explained. What we have now is built on choice and mutual respect. You're right, Brandon agreed. And do you know what that means? What? Emily asked. It means that this time, no matter what happens, it's going to be real, Brandon replied. Emily smiled, feeling a deep peace in her heart. 2 years later, on a sunny spring morning, Emily was at the flower shop preparing arrangements when Brandon appeared with a bouquet in his hands. What's this for? Asked Emily, laughing. For the woman who taught a stubborn man that sometimes second chances can be better than the first, replied Brandon. Emily took the bouquet and noticed he had chosen all her favorite flowers. There was a small card nestled among the blooms. Read it, said Brandon nervously. Emily opened the card and read aloud. Emily, 5 years ago you prepared a bouquet for a wedding that never happened. Today, I'd like to know if you'd prepare another bouquet. For a wedding that, this time, will really take place. If you'd like to, of course. Emily looked at Brandon, who was now kneeling beside the flower shop counter, holding a small velvet box. Emily Parker, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Again for the first time? The right way? Emily glanced around the flower shop where it had all begun, where her life had completely changed that day 2 years ago. She looked at Melissa, who was peeking from the back of the shop with a huge smile on her face. She looked at the spot where the preserved bouquet had once been, now replaced by a fresh arrangement symbolizing growth and renewal. And then she looked at Brandon, the man who had learned to fight for what he wanted, who had become someone she admired and respected. Yes, she said, beaming. Yes, I will. Brandon stood and slipped the ring onto Emily's finger, then kissed her with all the passion he had learned to show. This time, Emily said when they parted, I'll make the most beautiful bouquet of my life. And this time, Brandon replied, I'll be the groom you always deserved. Melissa came out from the back of the shop, clapping and crying with joy. Mrs. Emily, she exclaimed, this time, I promise I won't swap the bouquet. Everyone laughed, remembering how it had all started with that mistake, which, in the end, had been the most important blessing of their lives. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Emily made the right choice giving Brandon a second chance? We'd love to hear your opinion and any similar experiences. Thank you so much for joining us.